Now let's go into the next segment. Let's appreciate the mission and mestizaje. Let's understand this mission known as this experience of mestizaje. It's very significant. I talked about it before. The establishment of mestizo societies in the north has its foundations on native traditions. So when we take a look at over a 140-year period, the Spanish colonial schemes, as I was introducing you to, the Spanish colonial schemes are going to be tempered by native response. Again, all missions have histories of peace, of rebellion, of raids, of destruction, of reconstruction. We need to appreciate that these experiences are going to be significant. Again, as I shared with you, that whenever a priest was assigned to an area, he's going to reside at the largest native village. Well, of course, he's going to take up the best agricultural lands because that's where he's going to get his surplus from. So a large spacious church is always going to be built around a rich agricultural field. In the outlying villages, a smaller, a temporary church was erected. The mission of residence was known as a cabecera. The mission station was known as a visita. Native peoples were participating in a barter exchange economy. And so by the time that the missionaries enter, the native peoples are very well aware of them coming up north from the south. And they know that there's a cultural baggage coming with them that contains both good and evil. So the missionary prejudices towards native practices are important to understand. This will determine the success rate. And so over a 140-year period, the process known as mestizaje, of the mixing of peoples, of the populations, the mestizaje in the north is going to take on a different direction than the mestizaje in the south. The mestizaje in the north has its direct foundations on the native traditions that are going to be infused and incorporated into the mission system, into the church. So Spanish colonial schemes are constantly going to be tempered by native response because aridity conditions the nature, the timing, and the success of Spanish plans. Now, at the same time as the Spanish are arriving in the Southwest, there's the arrival from the north of Athapascan-speaking groups into the region. Now, these Athapascan-speaking groups are known as the Navajo, the Apache, and then there's another group known as the Comanche and the Kiowa. Now, as I shared with you before, when the establishment of these mestizo societies, the horse was significant in the transformation of cultures. And what's going to occur, if you remember when I shared with you about the move north, when by the time the Spanish arrive, the Hohokam and the Anasazi and the Mogollon are disappearing and giving way to the new groups known as the O'odham, the Pueblo, and the Tarahumara. But as the new groups, the O'odham, the Pueblos, and the Tarahumara are emerging from the different state-centered societies, there's an appearance from the north of an Athapascan-speaking groups. And the appearance of the horse is going to create new movements along the plains, and it's going to increase trade in buffalo skins in the Southwest. So there's tremendous transformations that are occurring as Spanish colonial society arrives in the north. Because as Spanish colonial society arrives in the north, there's the sand desert river peoples, and then there's the Athapascans that are coming in from the north. So there's movements of change occurring, the transformations that are occurring in native societies and in Spanish societies as everybody is experiencing interaction with each other. Now the Athapascans, not the Pueblos, not the O'odham, not the Tarahumaras. The Tarahumaras are the ones that are in Chihuahua. The O'odham are the ones that are in Arizona. And then there's the Pueblos of New Mexico and Arizona, the Four Corners region. So there's the Pueblos, the O'odham, and the Tarumaras. They're the ancestors of the Hohokam, the Mogollon, and the Anasazi that I shared with you in the ancient past. These groups, when the Spanish arrive, are going to be experiencing the movements or new groups from the north arriving into their regions too. And the new groups from the north are the Navajo, the Apache, the Comanche, and the Kiowa. So very important to understand these groups as they come in from the north and the Spanish come in from the south, and so there's these transformations that are occurring in the Southwest. It's a very fascinating experience. The Athapascans are going to be sticklers. The Navajo, Apache, Comanche, and Kiowa are going to be sticklers for creating permanent societies. And the Navajo, the Apache, the Comanche, and the Kiowa are going to frustrate the processes of change. They're going to frustrate the Spanish plans for directed assimilation. The Spanish are going to go all out in warfare against these peoples. But likewise, the O'odham and the Tarahumara and the Pueblos are likewise going to be at odds with the Apache and the Navajo because of water. The whole idea, again, in the Southwest United States and northern Mexico is access to water. So everybody's going to be trying to find this precious resource. And so, not until the 1870s, when Quanah Parker is removed to Oklahoma, not until the 1870s, when Geronimo is captured in Arizona, will a sense of community and permanency be established between San Antonio, Texas, to San Diego, between Coahuila and Sonora. Okay? So it's important to understand this horse culture. And so at this time, let's go to a film clip and understand the Athapascan tradition.
It was the longest war in U.S. history, spanning an era that saw the Alamo, the Mexican-American War, and the Civil War come and go. It was the 60 years of ongoing battles, fights, and raids that took place between the Great Plains nomadic horse warriors and settlers, traders, and the United States military. With as many as 20,000 casualties on each side, it made the wild, wild West a dangerous and violent place. It is simply called the Indian Wars. People have occupied the Americas for perhaps as long as 40,000 years. Over these years, they have created great civilizations equaling any found in Europe, Asia, and Africa. In North America, Paleo-Indians hunted the mammoths and mastodons. They were replaced by archaic Indians who lived from 5000 to 1000 BC. They left behind remarkable cave art. In at least one instance, they hunted bison, the species known as the American buffalo, by driving them into kill sites on the eastern Colorado plains. But these hunter-gatherers were moving towards becoming agricultural societies. Prior to the arrival of Europeans in 1492, the transition to agrarian cultures had been nearly completed. Indian nations extended across North America. A network of cities flourished as a part of a mound-building culture in the East. In the Southwest, the Anasazi and their contemporary cultures built equally remarkable dwellings. Then in the historical blink of an eye, they all disappeared and were replaced by the configuration of tribes in place at the start of the 17th century, many of which then vanished as a result of European diseases and settlement. During this time, the great cities were replaced by small agricultural villages. Then as the Europeans expanded across the continent, the surviving tribes were pushed ever westward into a constantly redefined and shrinking Indian territory. However, during the middle of the 18th century, two parallel events occurred on the North American continent. the creation of a new type of nation, the United States of America, and the creation of a new kind of Indian culture, the warrior horse culture. Two remarkable human transformations that would eventually clash in bitter conflict. Two large mammal species played an equally critical role in creating the remarkable Plains Indians culture. One was the horse, an animal brought to the New World by the Europeans. The other, a member of the cattle family, was the American buffalo, indigenous to the continent. The American buffalo can trace its ancestry back to the Pleistocene era, when its relatives roamed among the mastodons, mammoths, giant wolves, and lions. In fact, the buffalo is the lone survivor from that ancient time. A herd animal, the buffalo is covered with long, dark brown, woolly hair. It has a massive head, high humped shoulders, and a tufted tail. Fully grown, buffaloes are 5 to 6 feet high at the shoulders and can weigh as much as a ton. Like other members of the cattle family, they thrive on grasses. Prior to the 1800s, it is estimated that the buffalo population ranged somewhere between 60 to 80 million. They were found wherever prairie grasses grew, from Canada to Texas, and from the Rockies to Ohio and Kentucky. It was said that when one of the vast herds moved through an area, it kicked up a cloud of dust, darkening the sky. For 10,000 years, buffalo had been hunted on foot by the Native American tribes, but were never the principal source of food and material for the Indian, as the deer or elk were. That changed with the arrival of the Europeans and their horses. The horse was particularly important to the Spanish in their conquests and explorations. The Spanish-Iberian Mustang was not a huge grain-fed animal like the horses from northwestern Europe and the British Isles. It was a desert-bred animal that could live entirely off grasses and go for long periods without water. It was capable of carrying a man in heavy armor over miles of burning desert and dry high plains. In 1680, there was a massive uprising by the Pueblo Indians against their Spanish overlords. When the surviving Spanish fled, they left behind their sheep, cattle, and horses. The Pueblo, a sedentary people having little use for the thousands of Spanish horses, simply let them roam free. These horses, thriving on the short grass prairies, formed the nucleus of the great Mustang herds of the Southwest and Southern Plains. This great horse dispersal produced, perhaps, the most rapid cultural transformation hitherto ever witnessed on the planet. Within 100 years, a number of Native American tribes on both sides of the Great Plains had transformed themselves into nomadic, buffalo-hunting horse cultures with names like the Cheyenne, the Sioux, the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Arapaho. Years after the great horse dispersal started, most of the remaining North American tribes had horses, but only a few tried the grand economic experiment of developing a true nomadic horse culture. At the same time, the short grass prairie offered a huge unoccupied region for expansion. While unfit for permanent settlement, it was ideal for any group that moved easily with the wanderings of the millions of buffalo. The horse provided the vehicle, and the buffalo provided a virtually inexhaustible supply of high-quality protein, giving the tribes willing to venture onto the plains the chance for rapid population growth. Each of these tribes has a unique story of its transformation into a horse culture. The why has long been lost, but the journey has been recorded. Looking at the Great Plains as a sea of prairie grass, all the eventual nomadic tribes started in the north, 3 from the eastern shore and 4 from the western shore. Unlike the other horse cultures, the Navajo and Apache moved into their 18th and 19th century homelands prior to the arrival of the Europeans in the 16th century. They were part of a very large subarctic group generally referred to as the Athabascan-speaking Indians. Their ancestral home covered a large part of Canada's Northwest Territory. Anthropological records indicate these people lived in small family groups, were nomadic, and hunted caribou. Sometime between 900 and 1400 AD, a group identified as the Southern Athabascans migrated south into present-day West Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. When the Spanish arrived in 1540, they were already split into 2 distinct groups, the Apache and the Navajo. Each had their own territories and customs. And because of their close proximity to the Spanish, they were the first to tame horses. In fact, in 1659, the Navajo were the first Indians to attack Europeans using horses. At the same time, their Apache relatives used the horse for food and as a beast of burden. The Navajo were more settled than the Apache. Like most tribes who had names for themselves, such as the True Ones, Only Ones, Real People, and Human Beings, the Navajo referred to themselves as Dene, meaning the people. They lived in permanent dwellings known as hogans. These 8-sided buildings were perfect for the desert Southwest, remaining hot in the winter and cool in the summer. Capturing horses, sheep, and goats from the Spanish, the Navajo established herds of their own. They became excellent weavers, and their rugs and blankets became highly valued trade goods. The most important person in the Navajo family was the woman, who owned the land, the home, and the livestock. All Navajo life centered around the family, including religious ceremonies. One of the most important was a healing ceremony known as the Night Way. In this ceremony, the Navajo used sand paintings like this one to heal the sick. Shamans, called singers, created these sacred pictures using crushed rock of many colors. While the Navajo practiced more settled activities like farming, the Apache preferred raiding and hunting. Indeed, the Apache moved seasonally with the antelope, elk, deer, and buffalo. Traveling in small groups or as individual families, they would set up a circular hut known as a wickiup. Each wickiup housed a family. From these camps, the Apache raided the Spanish or other tribes, capturing sheep and goats, which they ate, and mustangs, which they used primarily as pack horses. The Apache, though they numbered less than 5,000, were among the most warlike of the Indians and had long-running feuds with almost every other tribe of the southern plains and desert Southwest. They formed no religious institutions, but looked for spirituality in everyday life. The famous Chiricahua leader Geronimo, who was also a healer, explained, "We had no churches, no Sabbath day, no holidays, and yet we worshipped. Sometimes the whole tribe would assemble to sing and pray. Sometimes in a smaller number, perhaps only 2 or 3. Sometimes an aged person prayed for all of us." Unlike later arrivals to the plains, neither the Apache nor the Navajo formed any significant military alliances with other tribes. The Kiowas' journey onto the plains began somewhere in the Kootenay region of British Columbia, Canada. From there, they migrated into western Montana in the 1600s. Around 1700, they reached the Yellowstone River area. 10 years later, after acquiring the horse from the Crow, they found a home in South Dakota's Black Hills. Very quickly, the Cheyenne and the Sioux drove them from this home. Again, they moved south, where they fought a bloody war with the Comanche. However, by the beginning of the 19th century, the Kiowa formed a strong military alliance with their former adversary. This alliance was at the center of the battle for the Southern Plains. Their language is believed to be part of the Aztec-Tanoan linguistic stock. It is a language grouping spoken by many Mexican Indians. Like all the nomadic Indian nations, the twin centers of Kiowa life were hunting and war. Though small in numbers, the Kiowa were known for their exceptional bravery, strict military organization, and strong warrior societies. The Kiowa were also known for their incredible storytelling pictographs. Indeed, they came very close to developing a written language. Much history of the Indian Wars comes from their pictographic records written on buffalo hides as a kind of yearly calendar. Another nation, later called the Kiowa Apache, accompanied the Kiowa as they migrated south. Though unrelated genealogically to either the Kiowa or Apache, they had the cultural traits of the Kiowa and spoke an Athabascan-based language like the Apache, hence the Kiowa Apache designation. Their Uto-Aztecan language places the Comanche as part of the Shoshone Nation that occupied a large part of the Great Basin area of Wyoming, Utah, and Nevada. Sometime in the 17th century, a small band of Shoshone from the mountainous region of Wyoming migrated south along the Rocky Mountains. Around 1700, they acquired horses, and by 1720, they were in present-day Kansas. By this time, they had become the finest horse breeders on the plains, owning the largest and richest herds of Indian ponies in the West. For the next 150 years, the Comanche would lord over the most expansive Native American empire the continent would ever see. Master horse warriors, the Comanche fought and defeated the Apache and the Spanish. It is said that the Comanche killed more whites than any other Indian tribe. Eventually, they formed military alliances with the Kiowa and the Southern Arapaho and the Southern Cheyenne. Although the Comanche controlled a large empire that stretched across the southern plains, they were less organized socially than their Kiowa allies, but organized in small bands of 100 or so warriors. The Comanche rivaled the Spanish conquistadors in wealth and power. Like the Spanish, they were also slave traders and profit seekers. Of all the Plains nations, the Comanche were the most open to new ideas. It was perhaps their greatest strength. According to historians Joseph Cash and Gerald Wolfe in their book The Comanche People, the Comanche, by bringing in captives from so many different groups, kept their nation vigorous and far-seeing. But while the Comanche were far-seeing, they also recognized the value of the old traditions, such as using spider webs to tell when a storm was approaching, thus enabling them to use the weather to their advantage during raids or hunting.
Okay, so I deliberately wanted you to see all of this clip so that you could recognize the different groups and the significance of the horse and the buffalo. And again, let's rehearse this so that you can appreciate something about what's going on in the Southwest between 1750 to 1800 in this period, in this crucial period of the 18th century into the 19th century. This is the key to understanding the establishment of mestizo societies, the establishment of the Chicano experience, and recognize the different dynamic forces that are in operation here. There are the native peoples, okay? There's the move north, and then there's the Athabascan-speaking groups that coming into the region, okay? So we have the Move North, the Mission de Presidio, the Pueblo, the program of directed change, turning Native peoples into Mexican workers. Then there's the Native peoples that are part of that region, that from the sand, the desert, and the river, that they have a common language, they have a common culture to share techniques for resource exploitation. There's distinct dialect groups that reflect the changes in aridity. It influences the types of movements. They incorporate all the different possible responses to aridity. They have a desert supermarket. Then there's the Athapascan speaking groups, the ones that are coming into the existing barter economies. They have their subsistence techniques. Everyone has religious ceremonies that reflect the concept of reciprocity and reliance, but there's also animosity, especially when it comes down to water and especially during periods of drought. But there's a trade in subsistence goods. There's collaborative actions to control environmental uncertainty. This is important, okay? So this ends this particular segment of the establishment of mestizo societies.